Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to your seats. We're going to be starting the next section in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Will be governor, and then I'll go to you, speaker, right on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome NGA Vice Chair Governor Andrew Cuomo and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi.
Well, good afternoon to all. On behalf of all the governors who are here today and the chairman of the National Governors Association, Governor Hogan, let me welcome Madam Speaker for being with us today at our winter meeting. Thank you very much. We know you have a very busy schedule and you're very kind to be with us. As a matter of full disclosure, I am not objective. I'm a big fan of Madam Speaker. We've been personal friends for many, many years. As my children will tell you, when the speaker comes on the television, we have a mandatory silence policy so we can all hear what the speaker is talking about at the time. I will not ask Madam Speaker about anything new that happened to come up in Washington over the past few days. I think we all understand that. But I'd like to start, Madam Speaker, on a slightly different tone and talk a little bit about your background. You know, we're in this hyper-partisan, hyper-political time, and I think sometimes people lose the humanity of what we do in public service. We focus on labels and titles and positions, and we forget that we're all people trying to do good things. And you have an interesting background. You're from California now, but you were a born East Coast person, so you have that bi-coastal experience. Your father, Thomas D'Alessandro, was a congressman for 8 years, mayor of Baltimore for 12 years, and then your brother, Thomas, was also the mayor of Baltimore from 67 to 1971. Your mother was involved in politics, so you very much come from a family business of politics. And I'm curious, did you always feel that you were interested in public service? Did you know you wanted to run for elected office coming from that background?
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation to be here. Governor Hogan, Maryland, my Maryland, I always say. Our governor from California, whom we're very, very proud, and proud of you, Governor, as well. I'm in awe of the National Governors Association because just the weight of all that you do is so significant and so in awe of that we sent you some of our very best from the House of Representatives, Jared and, well, His Honor, Governor Polis, Governor Walz. Where's my New Mexico? Don't let me take attendance. I won't go any further. And of course, I've known Jamie Pritzker because he has California. J.B. Pritzker because he has California connections growing up there at an early time. But all of you, congratulations and thank you for what you do for your country. And as you said, Governor, this is we all have a commitment to public service, and that's what we should respect in each other, recognizing our differences, but also knowing that in any given moment we're all a resource to each other, that it is, as I say to my members, there are eternal friendships, but they're never eternal animosities. You never know when we're going to need each other in this kaleidoscope of public service that we are in. I have been in awe, using the term again, of the governor's father, and I knew him when he was, I guess, in college at the time, advising your father then, and I'm so proud of your leadership and the tradition in your family. In your family and mine, public service really, if I may, on this Sunday morning, sprang from our deep faith. That we had a responsibility, a sense of community, the Gospel of Matthew and the rest. And in our family, I was never even, to your point, I'm never thinking of running for public office. I mean, that was I just want to be normal, you know, in other words, have a weekend. And you understand what I mean. In other words, you have no weekends, you have no... And so, no, that wasn't it. My brother was always interested. He became mayor. He was wonderful, very daily communicant. His public service was a extension of his faith as well. And we were all taught that public service was a noble calling. It didn't mean you had to run for office. It just meant to be engaged in public service and recognize our responsibilities to each other as Americans and our family. Again, very much part of our faith. The family, just to go family, that was something of this. Congratulations, your father, and the public service family, and the courage of your father. Thank you. case you don't know, Governor Hogan's father was the only one on the Judiciary Committee to vote for impeachment of Nixon. That was very courageous at the time for your service of your family. But our family was this. We grew
30 up from 40%, and a goal of 100% renewable power by 2050. We have the most significant renewable standards in the country, and we've established by law an aggressive goal of installing 100,000 heat pumps by 2025. Many of us were at the Korean ambassador's residence last night, and he was describing the architecture of the building and how it was modeled on historical homes in Korea. And I looked up, and above our heads were two large heat pumps. And I thought, well, that's adaptation. And in the house, the governor's mansion where I reside during the week, there are 22 heat pumps. Those were put in by my predecessor. I think Maine consumers can save on their heating bills and save costs overall by using heat pumps.
Election, and we've really invested this in North Dakota because we're past the era where you can hire a state employee and give them a clipboard to pick up and have them drive around the state and try to collect data. Human collected data is expensive and inefficient. Automatically collected data can be accurate and low cost. And so with this push towards innovation over regulation, which is how we think about all of these issues, we're working right now in a whole across every agency to increase the amount of automatically collected data we have to help increase that resilience. For our folks that work in flood control across the state, we have deployed a thing we call Presence, which is pushing remote systems data for solar-powered collection for hydrology information. Now, instead of just collecting them on the major rivers, we can go to streams and other places that might only be flooded seasonally. Don't have to send somebody out there to do a check. We're automatically collecting data. We've got a project called Wise Roads, where we were doing all kinds of road closures that are important for both industry and human safety. But sometimes we're doing that off a weather report, and we might be closing roads across an entire part of the state, when if we actually had automatically collected data built into the roads themselves, we could be more precise about which roads were open or safe, or the cost of having to deploy to keep those roads open and clean. All governors here have got a huge network of pipelines across our nation. There's over 38,000 river crossings for natural gas, oil, and other pipelines in our nation. When I took office 3 years ago, I had to ask a question: where are they? How old are they? What kind of condition are they in? Very hard to get a hold of that data, and I would encourage other governors to ask your teams to think about that. Some of the new ones are probably in great shape. Some of the old ones built 50 years ago probably present some risk, but there is an opportunity, again, through automatically collected data. And so our state challenged the pipeline industry to step forward. We created a private-public partnership where the state is putting up R&D dollars that match the private sector in a Shark Tank-like environment where they're competing for ideas. And we've got 4 ideas that have been funded that can all be potentially transformational. One is a satellite-based satellites that would allow us to do satellite analytics and be able to detect early detection before you actually have a spill. You detect. And again, we're not trying to build like black boxes for the airline industry so we can tell you after we have a spill. We're trying to create solutions that detect ahead of time. Another one of those is intelligent paint, where there'd actually be sensors in the paint, so the paint at the intersection of the joints, which is where the weak spots are and most of the leaks would occur, could actually detect it ahead of time. We have another one people I'm sure know, pipelines, we just run a pig down there, and now they got smart pigs. Many of the older pipelines, too many twists and turns, geologic shifts, diameters might change. You're not able to do that, so there's a company that's created a product called a piper. It's the size of a golf ball. You drop it into the pipeline, it floats down in any fluid, and it can acoustically detect whether or not there's going to be some kind of problem or not. And then finally, when you get humans interacting with data, alarm fatigue can happen. That can happen in healthcare. It certainly happens in many kind of, if you're in a ever been to a pipeline monitoring station, but one company's teaming up with IBM Watson to create an artificial intelligence solution which would use big data artificial intelligence to be able to detect even the slightest changes in pressure that may indicate that there's a problem. So this is all in a matter of a couple of years, and I think as people in government, we tend to lean hard on regulation when there's a problem. Then we're going to, and we have a natural disaster, then we're going to come up with a bunch of regulations, never happen again. And I think you need to have in your toolkit as leaders to understand that with, Moore's Law driving doubling of digital power every 18 months at half the price, that there's solutions that couldn't even be imagined by the time we get a regulation implemented in a inspector in a pickup driving around. If that takes 4 to 6 years to get it through your state legislator and do it, by that time we've turned the crank on Moore's Law 3 or 4 more times, and you could have solutions like this that are actually really help our resilience. And the same thing with cybersecurity. I'm confident that there isn't any state in the nation that's spending too much on cybersecurity, and as any of you have had communities or universities that have been hit with any kind of ransomware or have been shut down like some of our large municipalities have, the adage is on cybersecurity that you will be happily to spend millions or tens of millions of dollars after the fact when your legislature might have been unwilling to spend dimes ahead of time. And so we have got the support of our legislature, and we're trying to spend more than dimes, but trying to spend that ahead of time to build that up, because this is one of our biggest resiliency risks. So look forward to questions, but again, thanks for inviting North Dakota to be on this panel.
You had me at intelligent paint, which I made a note. By the way, if I may, I got a little preamble, because I'm going to paint a very dystopian picture of California. So can I just briefly, before I do that, make a case for California? It's a remarkable time because we're enjoying a $21.5 billion operating surplus, record reserves, bond ratings increased twice in the last year, 119 consecutive months of net job growth. The state's averaged 3.8% GDP over the last 5 years. And it's not my state of state. But I need to say that because the state of our state has been highlighted in the national news and in your consciousness, that it's a state on fire. It's a state that has the largest utility in the United States of America, PG&E, that's in bankruptcy because of the fires. If any of you still are confused by science and still don't believe in climate change, come to California. Mother Nature has joined the conversation. The hots are getting hotter, the dries are getting drier, the wets are getting wetter. We just came out of a 5-year drought, 3 of the worst fire seasons in California history during that period of time, the one that generated a lot of national consciousness and attention appropriately. It was the Camp Fire, brought President Trump out there. We're grateful for his visit. 18,804 structures were lost just in that one fire. 85 human beings lost their lives. Year before, we had the Tubbs Fire that also generated enormous amount of news attention. 23 lives lost, 7,492 structures lost in that fire. All of you are paying the price for that. All of you generously have helped support our efforts on debris removal and FEMA support. Many of you around this room, quite literally, I look at 4 governors that were kind enough to send us a lot of resources in the last fire season, which is really now a fire cycle year-round. But in the peak of our season, you were generous enough to send mutual aid from all across the country, from obviously places closer to home like Oregon and Washington State, but as far away as Montana, where we were seeing assets brought bear. We are sharing assets. You may have seen in Australia, we lost one of our C-130 training planes that we sent over for the fire suppression efforts in Australia. That tragically, that plane crashed. Gives you a sense of the mutuality as it relates to this and what's happening not just in the United States and western part of the states, but also around the rest of the world. So we're trying to meet this head on. We got a bankrupt utility. We're trying to get out of bankruptcy, but they're feeling the pressure of trying to underground and harden 150,000 miles of overhead wire. And they're operating conditions the likes of which they never could have imagined a decade or 2 ago. We got 1,000 miles of coast. I grew up in San Francisco. We mark literally a century ago 8 inches the sea level rise just in the last century. We expect that to increase exponentially into the new century, losing our beaches, 150 million trees that have died in the state of California because of the drought. And obviously the impacts in the economy are pretty severe, particularly as an ag state. So we have all the same audacious goals. You know, we're all 100% here, 100% there. We're all competing in that, but we're really now in the how business. And we got to apply those goals. We got to implement our strategies. And one of the areas that I just want to offer, and I try to be brief because I'm sensitive to time, is our fully functioning cap and trade program has provided some $8.6 billion of investments that have allowed us to drive innovation, drive technology solutions, and drive strategies. Our policies have really accelerated investments and economic opportunities in this space. California, as a large oil-producing state, now has 5 times as many green tech jobs as we do fossil fuel jobs. We're proof of that paradigm. It's no longer an and, or rather an or. It's clearly an economic imperative for us to move in this direction and transition to low-carbon green growth. But the most exciting thing we're doing, at least from my humble perspective this year, is we're getting our pension system, all $700 billion in our 2 large pension systems, to start aligning investment strategies in our climate resiliency frame. And that is a very meaningful thing. That's an opportunity to truly move markets. I put $1 billion in this year's budget up for a climate catalyst fund. What was interesting about doing that, immediately generated interest from the Gates Foundation and others that are looking to potentially partner with the state of California to provide additional resources to really catalyze an innovation construct and mindset in the state. It's a long way of saying this. From the ashes that we have quite literally been working our way through, tremendous opportunities present themselves in this space, but the imperative of meeting this moment is profound. And I just hope we can move past the, this dialectic back and forth, and folks can start to wake up to this reality in a more meaningful and systemic way. And as I said, we're going to need all the help and all the partnerships we possibly can get. And I think this is, in closing, very exciting, because just to hear Governor Mills, Governor, you guys talking about the best practices, this is a kind of enlightened competition, and I think significant opportunity for all of us, particularly at NGA, to start sharing a collaborative spirit, regardless of party, to really push through an agenda that we all can be proud of. So I thank you guys for your leadership, and Governor Hogan, thanks for having this opportunity to dialogue.
We have time for questions? Okay, good. Questions from other governors? I mean, we'd like to hear from your states too, and how you're interacting with your local governments in particular on emergency disaster efforts and preparation, mitigation. Nobody's doing that? John Bell.
Thank you very much, Governor, and thank all 3 of you. I really appreciate the information and you sharing what you're doing in your states. We're no stranger to disaster in Louisiana, and most notably going back to Hurricane Katrina, but since then, multiple floods. We're ground zero for coastal land loss because of subsidence and coastal erosion, but also sea level rise. But we have a conference in New Orleans where the NGA is actually partnering with RESCON. And this is one of the premier conferences anywhere in the world about resiliency. It's about preparing for and recovering from disasters, and it will include now cybersecurity. So I want to put a plug in for this conference with all of the governors. Hopefully you can attend, but at the very least send someone to New Orleans. I think they will get a tremendous amount out of it to the benefit of your state. It happens to be April the 28th through the 30th in New Orleans. And just so you know, the Jazz Fest will be going on at that time. So you might want to come personally. But I can guarantee you it will be a rewarding experience, one where you will learn from academia, international organizations, other states, and business folks from the private sector as well. So I would encourage all of you to give some thought about coming down to New Orleans April 28th through 30th, or at least sending some folks from your administrations.
That's great. Everybody planning to go? Now I am. Well, what about interactions with local governments? How do you help prepare them for these kinds of efforts?
Our biggest stress is land use. We got 11 million people living in the WUI, this wildland-urban interface. And right now, because of these wildfires, folks are having a hard time getting insurance. They're not being renewed. The premiums have gone through the roof. We've got a state plan, the FAIR plan now, where we're seeing huge premium spikes, and the ability to absorb all the private sector abandonment there is going to be challenged. So, we're trying. The stubbornness on land use is difficult, and localism is determinative from a land use perspective. But this is perhaps the most significant thing we can do in terms of being future-proofed, in terms of addressing the issue of resiliency broadly, because there's a general sense of retreat now on the coast, on the coastal bluffs and the like, losing again beaches and the erosion, the king tides now happening not every 100 years, every 10 years, every year, and the challenges associated again with that wildland-urban interface in particular make for a vexing relationship at the moment between the state and local government.
Are the towns and local communities adapting by changing their zoning patterns, their zoning rules, ordinances in either of your states?
We haven't seen it yet. I mean, no, it's difficult. Some of the, we got a housing crisis in California. Last thing we want to do is tell folks not to build housing, particularly in areas where the land's a lot cheaper than some of the urban environments. But it's, you see these master plan communities right in the middle of these zones, and you go, what the hell are these guys thinking? And again, you go up that campfire area. I mean, it's a fire tornadoes coming through. Only one part of that community you can get out. Everybody's, you saw all those videos. And we're seeing that replicated over and over in all parts of our state. And so we may come down a little more aggressively with a hammer from the state level. But again, local government, and as we all know, those come from it. That's a stubborn issue to address.
Thank you. Governor Bergman.
I would just say, yeah, we're coming from a state where we believe a lot in local control and self-determination. But even with that, we have to understand that we're in a country where most of the built environment in the last 80 years in this country has been built with that's been automobile-centric and not people-centric. And with that, you end up generally with communities that have been built out, not up, and that creates, the cost of local government, school districts, park districts, all their costs go up, rising property taxes, lots of infrastructure to maintain. I'm sure that the numbers we had on the national numbers include all the, all that horizontal growth. But as a state, we're trying to really, through a thing we call the Main Street Initiative, try to drive private capital to existing infrastructure. That's the highest return for taxpayers, if you can get private capital to go back in where you've got existing infrastructure, as opposed to the opposite, which would be public capital, which is we had a school district that builds a new school, out in a greenfield site a mile or two out of town because the land is cheap. That's actually very expensive for taxpayers. So trying to, we've built dashboards for every community so they can see their own data and try to educate the local decision makers so that they can understand the decisions, the design decisions on where and how you build really make a difference on what then we have to rebuild after we've had a disaster. But the good thing about North Dakota is that virtually everybody in the state is so close to our agricultural roots, where it doesn't matter what year it is, you're dealing with things you can't control with Mother Nature, good years and bad years. And so we've got a lot of people who've got perseverance and fortitude and willing to work through that. So we've got a good spirit of cooperation. But some of these decisions are we're going to have to think differently about the future than we have in the past. And I'd say again on that, technology is changing every job, every company, and every industry, and it's certainly blowing up segments like retail. And a lot of communities built outwards because they're trying to accommodate drive-through restaurants and big box retailers, and those models are all under threat because of internet retail selling. And so again, there's an opportunity on those former big box sites for all kinds of infill opportunities to come back and build really tax efficient walkable communities, which helps increase health, increase the sense of community, increases a lot of things. And we also spend money on the back end because we're a nation that walks less than any other nation.
Wow, even in North Dakota.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from other governors? Yes, Mr. Governor Herbert.
Thank you, Governor Mills. Governor Edwards just reminded me of a lesson I learned from Louisiana. I was visited there about 15 years ago and saw the devastation from Hurricane Katrina and Rita. Lieutenant Governor Mitch Landrieu, now I think he's maybe not the mayor of New Orleans now, but He became the mayor of New Orleans. And he took me around and showed me what had taken place there and kind of the successes and the failures of government. And some of it was the people weren't prepared. And so out of that incident, what we learned in Utah was to put together a program where we enhanced the first responders, local government, which would be the cities and then the counties and then the state. The federal government's a little slower to react. They can help pay bills and come and do the aftermath, but they're not going to be the first responders. And we also put together a program that helps us prepare families, individuals, 72-hour kits. You know, it's always been asked, you know, we call it Be Ready Utah. Be ready for what? Well, fill in the blank. We could have fire, floods, earthquake, drought. We've had all of the above. But individuals and families need to take on the responsibility themselves. We work with our schools, so they have a 12-step program, what they need to be doing in the schools, along with a 12-step program for families and individuals. They can go to our webpage and get instructions and find out how to take care of, how do you turn off the natural gas in your home? How do you secure your medicines? What do you do about your pets? What about elderly people, maybe your family or your neighbors? And then we took a third step, and that was the private sector businesses. If you have that kind of an acute problem, next thing you have looting. Somebody's going to the local Walmart and taking, some kind of issue, whether it be a generator or something to help with your water purification, things you should have had on hand. And so we have now a consolidated 4-step program, private sector, school, business, and government, all working in concert under the heading of Be Ready Utah. It's going to help us. It has helped us already when we've had some fires to have the first responders taken care of. Neighbors act. Government comes in and takes care of the mop up, the cleanup. But it's a concerted, combined effort, not just looking for the federal government to come in and bail us out. So anyway, it's working for Utah, and again, I thank Louisiana for sharing us that information, which created a great program in Utah.
Thank you, Governor Herbert. It's like, you know, everybody says it can't happen here until it does happen here. And it can happen in any one of our states. These disasters, whether cold, hot, wet, dry, and we've got to be ready. I think we've all sat back for years and years and thought, well, if something bad happens, FEMA will come in, the federal government will help us out. We've got to start this at home, and as you said, building families' resiliency, businesses locally is important, bottom up. Thank you very much. I think that ends this panel discussion. I'm going to take the liberty of moving into a brief presentation about the great state of Maine. Floods, blizzards, and rains, and rising waters notwithstanding. We're inviting you all to visit our great state in the city of Portland on August 5th to 7th. We have a booth outside where you can pick up some chocolate-covered blueberries, best blueberries in the world, wild blueberries. We're also going to offer a lobster bake on an island in Casco Bay. We're working on some really dynamic speakers for this summer conference. Portland, Maine, not to be confused with Portland, Oregon. Portland, Maine has been cited by Bon Appetit and others as the foodie capital of the country now. There'll be exciting delicacies and restaurants to enjoy. Maine has become home to more than 150 craft breweries, if you like craft brews. All of that will be at your fingertips when you come to Portland, August 5th to 6th, 7th. And I want to extend a personal invitation to every one of you. Hope you can make it. It's going to be informative and fun. And I think that there's a film to be shown somewhere.
Hello, I'm Maine Governor Janet Mills. I have been, to put it mildly, gently encouraging the National Governors Association to hold their next summer meeting in Portland for a little while now. And guess what? It's happening. I'm excited and thrilled to be able to host you all as guests in my great state this coming August. So, now that it's happening, let me offer a little trip planning advice. 1, make sure you book your travel to Portland, Maine, and not that other Portland or any of the other Portlands across the country. I'm sorry, Governor Brown, but after all, Portland, Maine was founded first. 2, when you come for the meeting, Be sure to schedule in some sightseeing time for yourself and your families. Whether it's our western mountains, our lakes and streams, great for fishing, our rolling fields and forests, or our 3,500 miles of iconic rocky coastline and gorgeous islands. There's something for everyone, and the weather's going to be great. Plus, from the Old Port to the Arts District, with museums and shows to historic parks and forts along Casco Bay and the Atlantic Ocean, Portland, Maine has a lot to offer you this summer. Finally, I shouldn't say finally, it gets people's hopes up, but finally, enjoy our wonderful food. Maine has so much superb cuisine to offer you. Governor Hogan, I know you love your Maryland crabs, but we've got lobster. It's worth a try. Plus, Portland, Maine was named the best restaurant city of the year, and I hope you will all find out why. I am thrilled to welcome you all to Maine next summer. You know, re-engaging with the NGA and getting to know all of you, hearing your challenges and your successes, proposing new solutions with you has been of tremendous benefit to me as governor, and I look forward to building on those relationships. Thank you, and I hope to see you all in August for the NGA Summer Meeting 2020.
I never had the opportunity to introduce myself before. That was a little bizarre.
Well, Governor Mills, thank you very much for leading the panel, and thank you so much for hosting us in Maine. I think it's going to be a terrific visit. And while you know, we can have an argument about Maryland crabs and Maine lobster, I'll just settle for eating both of them. How about that? But thank you very much. Our next session will explore workforce solutions, pathways to prosperity. And to begin today's discussion, we have Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who is the chair of the NGA's Education and Workforce Committee, and he's going to lead a discussion on how states can provide workforce training. Governor Hutchinson will be joined by Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, and she's going to talk about steps that her state is taking to change lives and improve states' economies through workforce and reentry. I also want to take this moment to, while we're talking about the summer conference in Maine in August, at that very conference, we're going to have a new vice chairman of the NGA, and we took a unanimous vote yesterday, and Governor Asa Hutchinson is going to be the next vice chair of the NGA, and I want to congratulate him. Thank you, Governor. With that, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Governor Hogan, for your leadership, and also thank you for being a good campaign manager for me. I appreciate the direction you're taking the NGA. Every day, governors face workforce challenges, but governors across the country continue to find the best solutions. And to kick off this session highlighting workforce strategies for governors, I'm going to feature some of the work that we are doing in Arkansas to create second chances for formerly incarcerated individuals. And I'm delighted to also hear from Governor Reynolds a little bit later to tell us some of the things that are happening in Iowa. Whenever I got elected governor, and actually when I ran for governor, I was told that whenever they left prison after however many years they served there, they would be given $100 and a bus ticket. And I said, that's not much chance for success of not reoffending. And I made that comment publicly, and I've actually been reminded of that from time to time, because those that are paying their penalty in prison, they hear those comments and they listen attentively, and those that want a second chance are looking for that opportunity. And so as a result of that commitment and the need that we have in our state and across the country, we reinvigorated our reentry programs, enhanced our training for those that are coming out of prison, and enlisted also the help of the private sector. I called it the Restore Hope Initiative, in which I brought faith-based organizations, private organizations together and said the state can't do it all. We can put some funding for reentry beds, but we need your help to give them a chance, and also to re-enlist the employer community so that they will open up their doors and not just eliminate someone because they checked the box because they have a prior offense. And so enlisting them changed the dynamics totally, increased the numbers of employers that participating, and then also helping them to have health coverage as they left prison relieves a burden on them. I have the habit of going to a coffee shop there in Little Rock area, and as I go in there, I met this one lady behind the counter, and she whispered to me and said that she had left prison, that she has a job, she had a big smile on her face, and she's in part of the reentry program that we started. And so about once a week I go in there and I check on her. So I have my own reentry check system, but it's exciting to see the progress that people make in life, the commitment, and how they seek a second chance and the struggles that they go through. One final thing that we're doing is that we created a 2-year scholarship program for particular fields, high need areas of employment. And this is for high school students primarily that are coming out that need a nursing. We're paying full tuition and fees for them to go in and get the skill training up to 2 years in a 2-year college. Well, I said, well, how about someone that has been out of the workforce for years and want to re-enter it, a non-traditional student? And they hadn't thought of that, but we made that program, that 2-year free tuition program, available for non-traditional students. And guess what? That would apply to someone coming out looking for an opportunity to get the training they need. So we're reaching out in a number of different areas. And now I'm pleased to introduce Arkansas's lead on prison reentry, Assistant Director at Community Corrections, Carrie Williams. Carrie's leadership has been critical to the success of our reentry program in Arkansas. She also sits on the Governor's Occupational Licensing Advisory Board, so she brings unique insight to this issue. Carrie, thank you for joining us today, and if you could tell us a little bit more about what's happening in the reentry programs in Arkansas.
Thank you, Governor Hutchinson, and thank you. What an honor it is to be here to represent the state of Arkansas in the reentry efforts that we've done under Governor Hutchinson's tenure. What we have learned is that reentry is a process, and it's not a program that somebody starts and finishes while they're incarcerated. It starts at intake, and then it is completed upon their successful reentry. We've been very successful in the efforts, and we've also learned that it takes just more than 1 or 2 silver bullets to attack these issues and to address these barriers. There's a multitude of issues that must be identified and connected to a resource while incarcerated and after release. To hit on some of the things that we're currently working on, we know that well over 80% of the inmates that are incarcerated have a substance use issue. So we are addressing those intently. We've identified them at intake, and we work them through the program while they're incarcerated. We continue that to a handoff to community supervision. 50%, some experts say, have a mental health issue. We have also started tackling that at a higher level. We partner with mental health at intake. They're assessed while they're incarcerated. They're treated while they're incarcerated. We've also begun doing telehealth across the state for the rural areas who have less opportunity to attend in person. The employment initiative the governor was talking about is 2018. We did a huge push for employment through the Good Grid and just through community awareness, and we increased our full-time overall percentage from 51% to 58% in just a little over a year. And that federal tax incentive really helped with that. Under Governor Hutchinson, we've also passed 3 pieces of legislation that have allowed inmates to be released with, at best, their driver's license, a restricted permit, or at least an ID, which they will have time after release up to 6 months to continue paying fines and fees to get those suspensions released from their driver's license. We do AANA 7 days a week in our reentry facilities and our correctional facilities. We also connect them to sponsors across the state. We use mentors, sponsors, and recovery coaches. We have enlisted recovery coaches that we have them embedded in some of the areas, offices across the state. We also ensure that everyone that graduates from a reentry program, that they have a mentor or a sponsor. We have Reentry on the Road, which is a new initiative we just started, which basically it takes a small team that we have in reentry, and we go from community to community to educate them on what's going on in our state, the barriers that we have faced, and the solutions that we have created to overcome them. Governor Hutchinson mentioned Restore Hope. We have been very successful with prisoner reentry and foster care in connecting the dots to those two major issues. We have 8 reentry facilities, which we opened the first one in 2015. It's a 180-day program that we screen individuals about 18 months prior to their transfer eligibility date. We slowly transition them through 15 hours of programming. They're full-time employed. They get family reunification, substance abuse, mental health, and they address their fines and fees. And when they complete the program at 180 days, their carrot is to have early parole. We have an online transitional housing application now. We work through the Good Grid reentry portal, which has also helped a big push for employment. We have increased those efforts. We have employers that will actually list that they are felon friendly, and the inmates can apply straight from incarceration. The online transitional housing application is just another layer to that portal, and we have increased our release from 60 days to now a max of 7 days to someone to be released to a transitional house. All inmates are approved for have an application prepared and submitted for insurance upon release from incarceration. We have begun using the Medicaid-assisted treatment programs in Arkansas, which has been very successful to help us attack those opioid addictions. And then as Governor Hutchinson also mentioned on the Occupational Licensing Board, and we have passed some legislation to try to assist in deregulating some of those barriers, and that will be an ongoing committee for the next couple of years. So as an agency, we have realigned our risk assessment so that we can better apply these resources to high-risk offenders, which in turn saves resources and tax dollars by not over-applying them to the low-level offenders who we know will probably be successful. Thank you for your time, and please feel free to ask me any questions.
Thank you, Carrie. And whenever you look at reentry programs and those coming out of prison, it's the right thing to do at a human level for those that are genuinely seeking a second chance. But it's also a practical thing to do because in every state we have low unemployment numbers. We're looking to increase those that are going into the workforce, and employers need the trained workforce, even those that are coming out of incarceration. I'm delighted again to be joined by Governor Reynolds, who's been a national leader in developing workforce opportunities for formerly incarcerated individuals. And we're pleased to hear from her perspective today. Governor Reynolds, thank you.
Well, thank you, Governor Hutchinson, and thank you for highlighting what you're spearheading in the great state of Arkansas on reentry programs. Iowans recognize the power of redemption and believe in second chances, and that's why it's been one of my priorities of my administration to not only focus on eliminating barriers, but to work on rehabilitation. And honestly, it is an overall approach to our workforce strategy initiatives and doing everything we can to put talent back to work. And I firmly believe that prisons should not be one stop in a circle that leads back to prison. And so we started with prison training programs like many of the states are doing. In 2015, we implemented statewide registered apprenticeship programs that offers training in all 9 of our institutions. We actually have 26 occupations that are a part of the registered apprenticeship program. We're continuing to reevaluate them to make sure that we're really aligning with the high demand careers that are available in the state of Iowa. We have 350 registered apprentices that are taking advantage of the registered apprenticeship programs. Over 200 apprentices have completed and earned their national certification. Last year, inmates logged over 170,000 apprenticeship hours in our correctional facilities across the state, and 18 have completed their programs and achieved their journeyman status. Iowa is also one of the states that had the opportunity to participate in the Second Chance Pell pilot program. And I know the federal administration, the administration is looking at expanding that. So if we get the opportunity, we would definitely encourage states to participate in that. It's a partnership, again, with the Department of Corrections and our community colleges, one of the most successful in the country. We have 514 inmates that are completing college classes since 2016. 67 inmates currently are enrolled. Here is a great statistic that I love to talk about. The average GPA of those that are participating in the Second Chance Pell program is 3.5, and when you compare that to traditional Pell students, GPA average is about 2.2. So they're taking it serious and they're very appreciative of the opportunity to do that. We also have figured out a way through technology to take it from 2 institutions that were offering that to all 9. So now we are expanding those learning opportunities to all 9 institutions. We also started a home building program. We traveled to South Dakota. Governor Noem had implemented that in South Dakota. And it's a win-win for on many levels. It helps them learn and also apply registered apprenticeship programs to that in electrician, plumbing, construction, across the board. In our first year, working with a public-private partnership and a nonprofit, Homes for Iowa, they built 4 homes. We're moving these out to rural communities across the state, especially some of the communities that have been impacted by some of the disasters that we've experienced in our state. The cost of the homes this year was $75,000. We hope to get that down to $60,000. These are 3-bedroom homes, unfinished basement, but have the opportunity to of course, finish those off, and we think we can do 18 homes next year. Also, we'll be bringing another successful program to the state of Iowa this year, and that is the Last Mile, which is an incredible program that's helping teach incarcerated individuals how to code in the latest technology available. I did what any other good governor would do. I was hosted by Governor Holcomb in Indiana for the President's Workforce Task Force, and he held the meeting at the Women's Correctional Facility where they demonstrated Last Mile that they have incorporated in their institutions. Incredible stories, incredible results. It's been in place for 10 years, and they have yet to have one person that has participated in the program any recidivism whatsoever. So I'm excited to work with Beth Skinner, who is my Director of Corrections, and get that implemented in Iowa. And then as I wrap up, one of the things that we've just started doing last year and will continue to do this year that's been really, really effective, and that has been the employer reentry roundtables that we are actually hosting in our correctional facilities across the state. And so it's bringing employers and HR managers into the facility, and just so they have some idea of the skills that they are learning while they're institutionalized, and what a great opportunity this is for them to solve their workforce needs. It gives them a chance to talk to other employers that have hired ex-offenders, to talk about the process that they went through, how successful it has been, some of the challenges, some of the rewarding aspects of doing that as well. We bring individuals that have completed a program and now own their own business or are successfully employed, so they can talk about their stories and the impact that that has had on their life. And we also have some of the inmates be part of the roundtable as well. And as I leave, often they're talking to me about how inspired they are, that there is hope, that there is opportunities out there. And so that has been just a win-win for across the board, and especially for employers to see the opportunity that exists there. And we've had 3 roundtables and have had over 250 attendees, so we've had great participation in that. We also are putting together a portal of employers that are willing to hire ex-offenders so that we know where to go to help streamline the process. We're putting mobility teams in our prisons that will have driver's license kits that will go to the prisons and help them get their driver's license before they leave, or start to identify where are the barriers that are keeping them from doing it. So I'll just wrap up by saying again, Iowa's economy is growing. We have low unemployment, more Iowans working than at any other time in our state history. And so again, this is part of our overall strategy, whether it's our Future Ready Iowa Workforce Initiative, whether it's investing in STEM, work-based learning, registered apprenticeship programs in our K-12 system, or second chances. We're really doing everything that we can to not only help all Iowans reach their full potential, but to continue to provide a pipeline of talent for our job creators to continue to see the growth that we're seeing in our economy. So thank you.
That's very encouraging and inspiring, Governor Reynolds. Thank you for sharing that. And with that, I'll turn the floor open to the other governors for questions of the panelists, or you might have a comment as to what's happening in your state. Governor.
Thank you very much for your leadership in this program. We're looking at doing something like that on our island of Guam, and we're looking to work with the apprenticeship programs through the Department of Labor and also with our Guam Community College. And as you were talking, I was thinking about what was the resistance with the employer sector? Was there a lot of challenges that you had to overcome? And I like your roundtable experience. I think that would help us in convincing employers to participate in this program, because if they don't, it would not be successful. And the other question I had is there any one industry sector that employs more of the reentry program, or is it even across the board?
Can we start? Go ahead. Oh, okay. I'll talk about the employer reentry roundtables. I think this has been an opportunity for employers. Well, first of all, it's a perfect storm. So they need employees so bad that they're really willing to look at different opportunities to do that. So by bringing them together and giving them the opportunity to hear from other employers that have participated in the program, we spend a lot of time just with Q&A and giving them the opportunity to answer. We have employers that are not only hiring them, but they're providing housing, they're paying the first month's rent, they're paying, so they are really a key partnership in all of this. Probably the vocational welding is probably one of the biggest areas that we've seen the most success with, and in the trades. When it comes to the registered apprenticeship programs, and manufacturing is where we've seen a lot of success with those participating in the program.
Let me ask Carrie Williams to add a little bit.
Okay, in Arkansas, what we've struggled with, and some of the questions when we do our Reentry on the Road initiative and speak to these employers, is for the majority of them, they want to hire somebody. It's an HR issue with some of them, but also they just tell us they want them to show up drug-free. So we know on the front end that we have to tackle the substance abuse and the mental health issues, and give a holistic approach to the employers, but they have come along beside us, and it's just really because of education, letting them know what their workforce is. We're working harder at getting more programs inside to get them the apprenticeships coming out, and to get them the trade so that the organizations would actually recognize them.
Other governors?
Well, first, I want to thank both of you, all three of you. Constructive and refreshing. I believe that criminal justice reform, including reentry, is the bipartisan or nonpartisan issue of the day, one where we all need to do better, and one where there are so many good ideas out there. My question is particularly on an area that my state needs to work on, which is revocation of parole and probation. And specifically what changes that you all may have made as you develop these reentry programs. In my state, our incarceration rate has increased 40% since 2004, and today we have more people that go into our institutions based on revocation of parole or probation than in any new crime. And specifically inside of that, we know that recovery is hard. It's very difficult, and people often need multiple chances at recovery. So how do you treat, for instance, a failed drug test on probation or parole, and what are those opportunities inside that system to give people a chance to achieve instead of sending them back for a period of years?
Let me start on that. That's probably a little bit unique to every state, and it's hard to be very clear in a conversation like this, but as you pointed out, some of the violations that could lead to revocation are failing a drug test for one time. If you're in a drug treatment court, you fail the test one time, they're probably going to give you another chance to do better. They're going to give you some consequences there, but they're not going to send you on the first time back to prison. And so we have a technical violation center. It's not the best word for it, but if they fail to report one time to the probation officer, if they fail to meet an appointment, that's a technical violation. We're not going to revoke their parole, and so, or we're going to send them to a technical violation center for a upgraded consequence, but it's not full revocation. And so, Governor Reynolds, did you want to comment further on that?
That's a big piece of what we're looking at this year, trying to find the balance to work through that, working with the Corrections Department of Public Safety, and in addition to, because that's one of the biggest reasons we see for the recidivism rates, right? And so the other thing that some of the communities are doing is just the support system that we're putting in some of these communities so that they have access to treatment, they have access to some of the AA meetings or some of those services as well has been a critical component of the areas that have seen some great success with that. But that is a continued conversation that we're having this year.
Thank you all very much.
Governor Hogan has given me the hook You know this could go on.
No, it's a great discussion, Governor, and we thank all of the panelists very much. We're back on our schedule almost, and we've got the governor's only meeting and several other governors to present other topics. But yeah, I know there's plenty of questions we could talk about this all afternoon, but I want to thank you, Governor, governors, and Ms. Williams. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're going to move on now to the immediate past chairman of the NGA. I was his wingman for a year as vice chair, and he's back here to talk with Governor Polis about broadband innovation. Governor Bullock.
Thanks so much, Governor Hogan. And while many folks think of broadband as an infrastructure issue, it's really one that has to be viewed as a workforce solution for our states as well. Certainly pleased to get to share some of the work that Montana is doing to make broadband connectivity a reality for all of our citizens. If you live in one of Montana's urban areas, it's likely, certainly, that you'll have access to reliable and high-speed broadband. Our best data indicates about 92% of urban Montanans have access to broadband. If you look nationally, it's about 97% of people in urban areas have access to broadband. We also know that high-speed connectivity gives students access to that 21st century classroom, prepares them to live in that rapidly advancing technology-driven market. We also know it's going to foster economic development by supporting small businesses, creating jobs. But if you live in a rural community in Montana, geography, low population, all of it discourages investment by many telecommunications companies. That means only about 59% of rural Montanans have access to broadband and the opportunities that come with it. And this isn't just a frontier state issue. If we look across the country, only about 65% of people in this country in rural areas have access. So during my administration, we've tried to take steps, several approaches to kind of bridge that gap between rural and urban communities. In 2015, the state of Montana and I, began a partnership with a nonprofit group called Education Superhighway to increase access to affordable high-speed broadband in Montana schools. If I look back then in 2015, only about 3/4 of our schools could access broadband in accordance with the Federal Communications Commission's minimum goals. Over that 5-year period now, 100% of our K-12 students have access to broadband. It's really equipping those schools with that 21st century technology, allowing teachers to be innovative, preparing students to be successful in our modern and changing workforce. In that 5-year period alone, over 60% of our schools have been upgraded to fiber. And for all of our schools, medium bandwidth has increased by nearly 5 times. And we've also been able to then drive down the cost because the median cost of bandwidth has decreased by 76% over that same 5-year period. Now, we know Montana students, whether they live in urban or rural communities, are now receiving the best education possible to be successful in a modern economy. Never forget a trip I took to eastern Montana, a town called Plevna. Could almost be mistaken because it's near Governor Burgum in North Dakota. Has a population of 163 people. Participated in an hour of code with dang near their whole school, which was about a dozen kids. But that 1-hour introduction to computer science is designed to show that anybody can learn the basics and to encourage students to start looking at careers in high-demand fields. And that wouldn't have been possible, certainly, had the school not been equipped with high-speed fiber connections. Those students from that small farming community likely wouldn't have had the same access to computer science coursework as their more urban counterparts. Broadband in our schools is critical to ensuring equity of opportunity for all students. We look at it a federal investment that, and it's interesting hearing the speaker say about a $3 or $4 trillion infrastructure deficit. Some would say it'd be about $61 billion to get rural connectivity. We still can't wait, though, just for the federal government to take those steps. We've also looked into ways to establish connectivity beyond our classrooms in small towns. Earlier this year, I tasked my lieutenant governor with touring a handful of small Montana towns, identified tangible ways to expand economic opportunities in rural and our tribal communities. We heard from those community leaders and stakeholders about their opportunities, their challenges, look for ways that public or private partnerships could actually assist. And one of the consistent things that we heard was lack of reliable broadband, holding communities back from reaching their full potential. One of those communities is a town called Troy. It's about 1,000 people in northwest Montana. It's indeed a small community, has so much to offer, located on the banks of a river, scenic mountains, attract residents and visitors alike for its abundance of outdoor recreation opportunities. But without broadband, new businesses are really discouraged from establishing themselves in Troy. Growth of any existing businesses is limited and new technologies confined. To address that, we partnered with both our local stakeholders and the Telecommunications Association, brought in Deloitte Consulting to develop what would be a connectivity roadmap outlining the steps to make high-speed, quality broadband a reality for Troy. Creating that map took about 12 weeks of engaging with stakeholders, hosting those planning workshops. But the result was really that framework that laid out the challenges, the approaches to address them, and most importantly, specific next steps to move forward. Funding Toolkit explains the funding resources, makes recommendations for the best options for Troy. There's 51 different federal broadband loan and grant programs. Communities need help actually navigating those complex processes. And as Troy moves forward now with it on its own project, we anticipate that roadmap is going to be a guide for other communities, help connect the nearly 40% of Montanans still without reliable connectivity. We know that already in 5 years, efforts to expand broadband have made a meaningful difference for our Montana students. Our future progress on that issue will bring economic opportunity then to those rural communities, also ensure that they have the resources to thrive. This really is an area where I think governors can make a difference and find solutions, especially if we look for ways to engage in partnerships and as governors continue to work together. The policies and innovative ideas that we can put into place to enhance broadband in both our rural and our urban area communities have an impact on every person that we serve. So thanks for allowing me to share a little bit of Montana's successes and challenges with all of you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Governor Polis of Colorado.
Thank you, Governor Bullock. Colorado is a very diverse state geographically and from a demographic perspective. Cities, Colorado Springs, Denver, Aurora, suburbs, exurbs, rural areas. So we're going to have a swath, but all including difficult geographic terrain, mountains, high plains. But as we know, in the 21st century, broadband is absolutely critical infrastructure that everyone needs. It's not just about the consumer experience, which it is, whether it's Netflix or Amazon or Hulu, whatever you're using. And by the way, that's the consumer expectation. If you want to attract millennials to live in an area, they have to have that. But it's a lot more than that too. It's also about a better education for young people. It gives rural businesses connectivity they need to compete in a global economy. It's about telecommuting opportunities for people who can have location-independent employment, living in some of those beautiful areas in the country and be able to telecommute. Not just what you might call high-end jobs. Traditionally, you might think telecommuting, maybe they're an architect or an attorney. It also means it can be high school-educated folks working in a call center virtually, living in a community that has lower cost of living and a higher quality of life. High-speed connectivity is also a lifeline for first responders, telemedicine, really critical for people's health as well. In Colorado, 86% of our rural households have access to broadband. Our goal is to increase it to 92% by 2020, by mid this year, 100% by 2024, so in just 4 years. We have a state broadband deployment board at our Department of Regulatory Affairs, which has committed over $19 million since 2016 for the last mile infrastructure. And our Department of Local Affairs is spending $5 million per year for the middle mile infrastructure to help get access to some of our more remote communities. The year before I took office, our legislature enacted regulations to prevent existing internet providers from easily capturing grants from new operators. We want to draw new market entrants. I also signed legislation that allows broadband providers to tap into electrical easements that already exist. So we can start building, we can remove barriers to building broadband without having to deal with the myriad of property ownership issues that can prevent the construction of new infrastructure. So we engage with our private sector partners. We have a couple towns that have done municipal broadband, generally smaller towns. But when you take the problem holistically, it's important to note that we have to get there. The economic benefits of getting there are great, as well as helping to meet the overall goals of rural economic success. When we launched our blueprint for rural economic prosperity, the expansion of high-speed connectivity to our rural communities was really front and center, critical for small businesses and Main Street retailers, just as it is for people who might telecommute from home or need to access life-saving medical services from home. So I look forward to engaging with the other governors as we work to optimize our strategy to expand connectivity across our state.
Thank you, Governor Polis. Questions, comments, things happen in other states. Governor Kelly.
Yeah. Actually, Governor Bullock, I'm very intrigued by your discussion of Troy and the fact that you've got connectivity at your schools and you're looking for ways to expand that. I think there's actually an article in the New York Times today that talks about Cottonwood Falls, Kansas, where we have exactly the same thing. Cottonwood Falls is dead center, Kansas. So the school district has connectivity, but the community does not, and it's actually losing businesses, and certainly businesses are refusing to move in because they don't have this access. So you figured out some way to fund it for the school. Do you have a plan for funding to expand outside the school?
You know, the challenge, and it is a real challenge as much as for these smaller towns too, because on the one hand, it may not look like it's cost effective to even be laying the fiber along the way. I mean, I'd love to, not supposed to be putting pitches in for necessarily private companies, but we had folks from Deloitte that went up there and spent several weeks engaging all the stakeholders, really put together that plan of how that they can get there. And then we're doing it again with them for one of our tribal nations where connectivity just doesn't exist. And it's bringing all the stakeholders together, figuring out, but I don't have necessarily a pot of money that I can, from the state level, to give to a community like Troy. What I can do is try to marshal the resources and also recognize the myriad of programs that you can also get from a federal loan and grant program that exist. Other questions, comments, what you're doing in your state? Oh, Governor Burgum.
First of all, Governor Polis, Governor Bullock, congrats on all the great work you're doing. And I would say maybe it's a part of the question to Governor Kelly, but having the same issue of once we got all the schools connected in this interconnected world, we got to get it out to every combine, every tractor, every rancher on a horse, everybody that's out, monitoring any kind of energy activity. You got to get it to every of the 2,000 wind towers we have in our state, and some of that may have to go wireless, for that last mile, and so we're trying to explore a number of different things where, whether it's TV white spaces, which is spectrum that's available, whether it's other forms of extended wireless, but that's one of the things that we're trying to do because it's just not cost effective to actually string the fiber all that extra distance. But you guys are doing some great work. Keep it up. It's when your states do well, it makes we can use that as examples to help push stuff forward in ours. So we all climb the ladder when we're pushing each other. One thing I would say that when we get all the schools connected, which we have, we got a gigabite to every school in North Dakota, and did that through a combination of private sector plus a cooperative of all of the rural telephone cooperatives, and so that has created a thing called the Dakota Carrier Network across the rural co-ops, and they've laid the backbone, and then we're able to get everywhere. But then when we've got every school connected, now we run into the situation we talked about earlier with the cyber issues. So we did push through last year, which we think may be the first cyber curriculum for every grade level. And we wouldn't think about it like, what does a second grader have to know to be safe when they're connected doing their work at that school? What's a fourth grader have to know? What do you have to know in your junior high? So we've actually created a curriculum and built it in. So instead of just teaching computer science in high school, we're teaching cybersecurity skills at every grade level all the way through, and then also added cybersecurity as a course for people to be able to take in high school in addition to the computer science, because it's a growing field and there's hundreds of thousands of cyber jobs that are available. So it's got a both protect students but a long-term workforce component, and we'd be happy to share some of the work we did relative to building out that curriculum and getting it approved by K-12 and moving that forward.
That's great, Governor Burgum. I'd also say to Governor Kelly and others too. Like, if you ask, let me have a map of my state and all of who has broadband access and who doesn't, it's not an easy thing to get, right? Because it's all private entities, and sharing that information makes it that much more difficult. I mean, we have been undertaking just trying to get broadband mapping. And another thing that I think we all have to think about, like, we all talk about trying to get these big infrastructure projects and proposals through our legislature. And I've never included broadband as part of the definition of that infrastructure. You know, it's because there's such unmet water, sewer needs, schools, bridges. But we really do have to start thinking of it as not only that economic driver, but I think as base infrastructure. So if local communities like a Troy or the one that you referenced could also look to some pot of money at the state level as well to help facilitate that. Other thoughts, questions? Yes.
Yeah, actually, Governor Bullock, we have started to include it in our infrastructure plan. You know, we've got a new 10-year comprehensive transportation plan before the legislature right now, and part of that plan includes, you know, as long as digging, you know, and then lay the fiber. That won't get us the last mile, but it will get us a long way down the road.
Governor Reynolds.
We have made an investment at the state level, and really for a relatively small investment, if you leverage private sector funding, you can really start to make a difference. So I asked the legislature for $20 million, which allowed me to leverage $120 million private sector funding. I was able to get 5. We had 1.3 held. So with 6.3 million, we were able to implement 17 projects in the state of Iowa. And then we stacked that with USDA funding that came in. We qualified for 4 projects. And so with relatively smaller investment, we've been able to really scale some of these rural areas and provide them the connectivity that they need to survive. We're not going to grow rural Iowa without connectivity. We're not going to get our young people to stay in those communities, and it impacts every single thing that we did. So I'm back this year asking for another $15 million to continue to leverage not only the private sector, but to take advantage of the federal funding that's there too, and I think they're coming out with more opportunities for states to take advantage of that.
It's great. And at the Western Governor's breakfast this morning, we had a number of cabinet folks there, and one of them said that there may be additional opportunities for federal dollars to either match or other complement, but also, Governor Hogan, as you're looking at, you'd mentioned earlier today, of trying to put together overall ideas for what the federal government could do. I mean, those investments in rural infrastructure, if we're ever really going to be that country where everybody has that opportunity to succeed educationally and economically, we can't leave rural communities behind, and that's an area where the federal government can help fill some of the gaps.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Great discussion. We're going to move on to our final panel, closing out and batting cleanup. We have the chair of the Economic Development and Commerce Committee, Governor Ducey, is going to lead a discussion along with Governor Kelly on removing occupational licensing barriers to employment. Governor Ducey.
Thank you very much, Governor Hogan, and thank you, Governor Bullock. And I want to say, while you'll hear Governor Kelly and I talking about occupational licensing, I hope what you're really hearing is how to grow prosperity in your individual state, because that's what this reform really does do. In Arizona, we've worked hard to make our state a land of opportunity for all. We've been fighting for occupational licensing reform for years. In 2015, we eliminated occupational licensing requirements for citrus, fruit and vegetable packers, yoga instructors at the request of yoga instructors, and driving school instructors. In 2017, we waived licensing fees for people earning less than 200% of the federal poverty level. And we were proud that last year Arizona led the nation in lifting people out of poverty, and we believe that that policy had a place in that good result. So several years ago, we wanted to expand this even further. Arizona began recognizing licenses that were out of state for military spouses. It worked well, so the thought was, why not extend this same freedom to everyone? Today, we're proud to say that Arizona is leading the way as the first state in the nation to grant universal recognition of occupational licenses from other states. So the idea is straightforward. We believe that you don't lose your skills just because you pack up a U-Haul and move from one state to our state. We're happy that you did. We want to welcome you. We want you to be able to get to work and earn a living. So this is about working men and women of America who are looking for their shot at the American dream, and we want to make sure that there's no obstacle in their way to pursue it. Behavioral health professionals, dental professionals, contractors, and more, over 600 Arizonans have received licenses under this new law in just a few months. Just one example is after we passed the law, and I believe before it even went into effect, I was back here in D.C. visiting. Arizonan came up to me in the airport, introduced himself, and was thrilled about the law, but didn't think that it would support the license that he had. I asked him what his license was, and he said it was he was a certified public accountant. And while we did pass it more for the trades and those types of things that you see in other states, the law does cover certified public accountants. So now he's in Arizona, wanted to move there full time. He's going to get his license and get to work. So we're proud of this progress. We think there's real opportunity on this front, and we're not going to slow down or rest on that laurel. This year, we've got a bill in the legislature that will require regulatory boards and commissions to have ordinary people, and I mean ordinary people and not industry insiders or cronies that are there to block or stifle competition, to make sure that it's those citizens that reflect the majority of the membership of these boards. The goal is to give unbiased public members more influence on these boards' decisions. There's also a bill that will stop these boards from collecting additional fees once they hit a certain threshold of cash reserves. We have some of our boards stockpiling millions of dollars in cash while still collecting fees on hardworking Arizonans, and we want that to end. And we are going to waive occupational licensing fees for our military heroes and their spouses. Just as Arizona, at this same setting over other NGA meetings, has been able to glean so many great ideas from other states over the years, even though I believe this is a competitive advantage for Arizona in terms of population growth, I'd like to see every other state apply it, because I think it will help the prosperity of our nation and allow people with skills to get to work without obstacles in their way. This is something I think you'll find broad bipartisan support for. That's what we found in Arizona. So I want to thank you and turn it over to Governor Laura Kelly from Kansas to tell us what's going on in the heartland. Governor?
Well, if I could, I would just walk out of the room right now and fly back home and talk to my legislature about passing the exact same law, because I'm very concerned about losing Kansans to Arizona. Because I agree with you. I think it is a very smart thing to do, and in some ways, to me, it's actually personal, because I grew up in a military family, and it would have been impossible for my mother to have a career as we moved every 1.5 to 3 years, and so just from that vantage point, I think that this is important, and that's one of the things that we are looking at in Kansas, is ways to essentially emulate what you have done in Arizona. We've taken sort of baby steps at this point. We have entered into a nurse licensing compact with other states, so that at least folks in the nursing field can move to Kansas and continue to practice. That is particularly important on our military installations. We have also, and here we're looking more at the reentry issues, and we've worked with our licensing boards to prevent them from considering any offenses that occurred 5 years before the application goes in. And we've also had them remove phrasing like moral turpitude and good character, because that allows way too much subjectivity to occur when those license applications are being considered. Another way we're approaching this, though, is our Department of Revenue is actually taking mobile units down to our corrections facilities and working to get some of those folks their commercial driver's licenses, so that when they are released from prison, they'll be certified to do that. We have a tremendous shortage in CDLs. We got a lot of highways and a lot of distribution centers in Kansas, and that's a real high need. So we are looking at that, and then we are continuing to look just across the board. I mean, if I'm not sure. You say it's bipartisan. I'm not sure, though, that I could get something, as sweeping as your bill through the legislature, but we're going to continue to just chip away at this because we, like every other state, really have severe workforce shortages in just about every area. I will say that, I think, Kim, it was you who talked about the welding in the prisons. We do have a number of programs now that where our inmates actually go to the workplace and are participating. A lot of it is welding, some of it's other kind of manufacturing, and we're getting those folks into apprenticeships, getting them licensed and trained, and then actually we're finding that they're staying and being employed, and we're working very hard to expand that kind of programming within our correction system. Our new Secretary of Corrections, who we stole from Idaho, is working very closely with our community tech colleges and with our employers in the area. So we expect that to expand. And, I believe Governor Leon Guerrero, it was you who talked about, getting businesses to work in this. We've approached a number of the businesses on this issue of reentry, and they've been very open. They're so short of workers right now. I think if the unemployment situation were different, we might not get that kind of response, but they're very, very engaged with this. In fact, we are working together with Koch Industries, they have a real serious interest in criminal justice reform overall, but specifically in this kind of thing, because the getting people licensed, getting them certified, really will prevent a lot of recidivism.
Thank you very much, Governor Kelly, and congratulations on the success that you're having. Thanks for the kind words, and also reaching out to find all the different available partners for this. Much like criminal justice reform, this is a fairness issue. And that's how we positioned it. And when you hear the testimony of some of the people that have or are living in your state and can't access work or have these obstacles in front of them that cost thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours when they have the skill right now and they've been certified somewhere else and they're in good standing. And if we can help with any of that, we're happy to. Like I said, I'd like to see this expanded everywhere across the country. Any questions or comments, or states that are doing other things? Governor Herbert, Utah.
Well, thanks to all three of you. I appreciate the leadership you've demonstrated on this and the issues you've brought to the forefront. A few years ago, we did what you're doing, Governor Ducey, in allowing military spouses to come, particularly those who are teachers, to come and have reciprocity from another state. I'm fascinated by your idea of expanding to all other occupations, and interested to know what that will look like. But the question I have for you is, do you have any concern, whatever the threshold is in Arizona, as you've said, here's the threshold for qualification to do whatever, dental assistant, welder, teacher. Are you concerned that you're going to not meet that threshold when you have reciprocity from other states that may not have as high threshold? I'm not saying that's the case, but is that a concern for you, that you may not get the same kind of quality that maybe comes with reciprocity, would have lesser education?
Thanks, Governor Herbert. It's a good question, and it was certainly something that was on our mind because, whenever you expand something, there can be an unintended consequence. But with the diligence that we did looking at the other states, the requirements that were out there, the fact that there is a check and a balance, meaning you don't have your license automatically transferred. You have to check in and register, and then you're checked to make certain that you're in good standing in the state from which you came from. And then working with our industry leaders, they were also, because they're having a tough time filling these jobs and positions, they need to hire people. It was really some of the folks that sit on these boards that might operate the training schools that would benefit from someone having to delay weeks or months to go into the workforce. So it's been a good experience so far, and we think it's going to be a positive.
Well, I can tell I'm fascinated with it. I want to look into that a little more. It reminds me of becoming a free agent. The power of the worker. They have more options, more places they can sell their skills, and so I think that's a benefit to those in the labor force.
And I think in this booming economy, I hear from every governor that we all have issues finding employees, whether it's at the entry level or at the highest level. It's a way for us. We found that many of these boards and commissions were standing in front of us and blocking us as an obstacle. This is something that, like I said, we had bipartisan support on. We were able to leapfrog over that and expand our workforce. Governor Polis?
Yeah, it's really, we have, reciprocity for military spouses in Colorado. We're working on opening it up more, but thanks for your leadership in Arizona on this. It's a great national model that we can learn from. One of the ones you mentioned, mixing up some of those boards so that they have more disinterested parties on it. We want to do that too, and there is, many of the statutes allow flexibility, but how do you get people that aren't in the game to apply and want to be on those boards, right? I mean, if you're trying to find disinterested lay people, it's a lot easier said than done. I mean, how do you go out and you get people who don't have, because you don't want people with a bias against or for, right? I mean, you really want a disinterested person to do something for their state. But do you have to be active yourself in that recruitment, or how do you get people to step up to those boards that are less glamorous, let's say? Sure, good question. I think in my last 4 State of the States, I've gone after our boards and commissions because in many ways they've been bullies in this. And we had government-funded lobbyists that were actually sitting on these boards, and we did have the executive authority in the governor's office to terminate those lobbyists. I didn't know why the taxpayers should pay for lobbyists that want to block folks or protect industries from a fair and level playing field. So yes, we will have to be active in recruitment. I imagine you have friends that don't want to come work in the governor's office or people that want to participate as a citizen in good government and that will be just fair arbitrators on these boards to level the playing field. And I'm just talking about the amount of constituents that contact, who want to get involved, but are outside of the industry, are not part of the crony people that block positive reforms and good decisions. Governor Bullock?
Yeah, Governor Polis, I'd say high school friends even. Yeah. Meaning like for some of these boards, because we all have citizen representatives, like I'm just leaning on people, please. And then by and large, once they do it, they're quite engaged. And I don't know if any of you have had real successes. I tried the last legislative session. There's a lot of these boards that at the end of the day, I don't know that we should be regulating them. And so I had this thought, we're going to get rid of a whole bunch of boards. And I think by the end of it, I got rid of 4 boards. And it is a challenge legislatively as well, because there's always vested interest of saying, no, we have to be continuing to regulate these, even if the level of regulation is probably of limited utility.
Yeah, our posture on this has been, we want to make sure that we're measuring twice, cutting once. What's the purpose? What's the reason? How does it protect health or safety? We have been able to eliminate a number of boards, but we want to see this reform, and we think the best way to do it is to have unbiased citizens that sit and participate. Any other questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yes, please, Governor.
So is this occupational reform only for U.S. licensed occupations, not foreign licensed occupations? It
would be a United States license, and I would want to check the fine print, but I believe, like any reciprocity between the territories, would be accepted, but I'd want to double check before I made that commitment.
Governor, so we did a bill, this took a bill, we now count foreign work experience for cosmetology hours. So when we have an immigrant who did work experience in Mexico or China, wherever it is, that can count towards their requirement. So we're looking, it's not exactly what you said. I have no idea what those countries do for licensing, but if they have real work experience, it can count towards your hours so they can practice their trade sooner and start earning a living in Colorado.
Good stuff. Thank you. If there's no more comments or questions, I want to thank Governor Kelly, and I'm going to turn it back over to Governor Hogan and point out that we're under budget and ahead of schedule.
I want to thank everybody for helping get us back on schedule. Thank all the governors and all the presenters. It was a great discussion. For the governors, our next governors only meeting, which is going to be a very important one, is 2:45. So we actually get our first break. But this is our last public plenary session, and I want to take this opportunity to thank the 44 governors and their spouses and their staffs, all the state officials, all of the folks that came out, from the presenters and everybody who attended the conference. It's been a terrific, I think, couple of days, and we want to thank everybody for participating. And with that, I'll officially end the 2020 winter meeting of the National Governors Association.